That's what I'm talking about. That's how you do an intro. But I just spent the last month making just that, and where do I go from here? I've got 2 days to make the rest of the video. What's up, crafters? Random Ranger here with the next tutorial in the Building a Spartan series. Today we'll be building the Spartan Gauntlet, but we're on a bit of a time crunch because this episode's going to be a little bit longer than my other ones that I would like, so we've got a lot more to pack in, so let's just jump right in. Okay, so before we jump in too far, the very first step before we start assembling everything together is cutting out all of our template pieces. So let's take a look at how we do that. The first step is to, well, get your templates downloaded and such, and then transferred onto your foam. So I just printed out my templates, and then I marked them onto the foam with a Sharpie. And then once we have them marked down, or possibly before, you're going to want to look at your reference content for the part you're making. So for our gauntlet, we have a Pepakura model where the templates are coming from, along with some game reference images that I'll link to in the description. Whatever part of the prop or gauntlet you're cutting right now, you're going to want to analyze that a lot from your reference material. You're going to want to figure out how it relates to all of the other pieces around it. And then you're going to want to figure out whether it's a raised or lower detail, and you want to pay attention to the edges specifically to see at what angle you need to be cutting with your blade. But once you get all this figured out, we go ahead and make our cut. But before we get too far in, I want to cover some vocabulary so you guys know what I'm talking about when I say inward, outward, snubbed, bevel, cuts, straight cuts, etc. So real quick, let's just cover that. Okay, there's really two kinds of cuts that I'm concerned about: bevel cuts and straight cuts. Straight cuts are simply when you just take your foam and you just cut it straight up and down. That's it. Now ironically, it's the simplest, but it's actually the hardest cut to make in my opinion, because you have to make sure that it is perfectly straight up and down, otherwise it is a bevel cut. Now for your bevel cuts, there's actually 3 different kinds, or 4 different kinds of bevel cuts. You've got inward, outward, and snubbed. And so snubbed inward and snubbed outward. So basically, all bevel cuts are basically just cutting at an angle. So if I just cut this at an angle, I'm going to go for about 45 degrees. That was a rough cut, but it'll work for this demonstration. Depending on which piece is supposed to be your prop, this will be considered an outward or an inward bevel cut. If this is my template, and this is the part I want to keep, then this would be an inward bevel cut because I cut into the inside of my foam. If this were the piece that I was trying to keep and use in my prop, this would be an outward bevel cut because I cut outward from the template. The snubbed variations of this is simply taking one of these bevel cuts and then also just cutting off this tip to snub it into a flat side. They're a bit trickier on the inwards, so I like to flip them over and then cut. Actually, those are really bad cuts, actually. But I'm just quickly giving a demonstration, so it'll be fine. I'm not using these. And with that, the majority of the cutting is out of the way. Now there are a couple points on this build that are more difficult than others, and I'm going to talk about some of these difficult points now. Okay, one thing to watch out for while you're making this gauntlet is on the model, there are little details right here on the back. I'm not really sure what these are, but just go ahead and skip those. Don't even add them in. They're not part of the game. I think they're just some stylistic choice added in by the modeler, but not doing those will make you more accurate and just save you a bunch of time, because in foam, those are very hard to do. Okay, so as you guys are cutting these top details right here, you're going to be really careful, because it's given how thin these are, you're going to need to use a very sharp blade. I would recommend swapping out to a fresh one, just because of how more fragile these are. As you're cutting this piece out right here, I recommend using a Dremel blade or whatever tools you have to cut out these ridges before you glue this all together. I did it after I glued it together because it made the recording and production of this tutorial a little bit easier for me, because then I can do things in stages and help keep track of all my footage. But for you guys not recording it, I would just recommend just cutting this out. You might get a little bit cleaner than I was able to. Just Dremel or cut that and then glue it all together. Okay, so one difficult point on this build is getting this piece to cut out and flushly line up on this edge right here. So what I actually did was I took the pattern that makes this piece right here and I mirrored it, so naturally it's going to cover this piece as well. But the square that went in there, I also put that in there, and I taped them together, and then I cut them out as one big piece, and then I just sliced down this line right here, and I just folded that down and I glued them together like that to get this ramp-like look, which if you look at the game is actually closer, in my opinion, to how the game represents it than the model's straight intruded look. Okay, stop what you're doing. This is the most important part of this video, and in my opinion, the most important step in the construction process, when you're gluing everything together. This is important because this is how, at this step, this is what determines whether or not your seams will be visible or invisible. To get an invisible seam, you need to line up your edges perfectly. So to do this, I get my face real close, real in to that foam. I get like right here. I'm staring down the barrel. And what I'm looking for is you got your main edges, and the way I cut, it's almost always a bevel edge. So I've got my bevel edge and at a slant, but at the tip of this bevel, at the very point, there's often an extra edge or like razor blade tip, almost invisible. You can't see it unless you're right here. And that is what I'm lining up. I'm not lining up the main edge. I'm lining up this razor tipped edge, and I'm layering that, matching that up with the other piece of foam, and when those meet up together perfectly, that's how you get an invisible seam. Before you start assembling all this stuff together, you're going to want to look at the model and at the game reference images. So the model is what you loaded up into Pepicura to print out your templates. Look at that, study that, see what's above and below other pieces so you can put them together. So if there's something right here and the parts are right here, you want to make sure you glue them like this on the part. But also look at the game at the game reference. So I have a set of images available at a link in the description, where you can find reference images for the gauntlet. And I want you to look at this and see how the game represents intruded and extruded details, or raised or lowered bumps. The textures and the model may not always line up. I've noticed that there are some inconsistencies with what's considered an up or a down detail, and sometimes the down details have weathering as if it was an edge, but it's not actually an edge, it's on the inside, so it's not even possible. So you're gonna have to make some stylistic choices in terms of how you want to represent that. I made some of those similar choices on my gauntlet. If you just follow the model, the Pepakura, as it is with those raised and lower details, it'll be easier because then the stuff will fit together just a little bit better. But if you want to start taking your own approach, or if you think, if you're looking at the game reference images and you think, well, I think the developers intended this, then you can try to go for those type of raised or lower details and vary from the template a little bit. Just know it may make the construction a little bit more difficult if the foam tries to fight you. And it fought me a little bit while I was building it. Okay, now that we've got all of that glued together, we're almost done with this gauntlet. We've just got a few small details to add. We're gonna have to freehand these because there's no template for it. But let's jump into that right away. To get this latch plate detail right here, all I did was I took a piece of paper and I just took a rectangular piece of paper, about that size, I put it there. And then I just traced on with a pencil the shape that I thought it looked like just by looking at the game reference images. And I would use points of reference to help me understand the scale. So I would look at, okay, well, how far up to this edge is the plate? And then how far past this edge is the plate? And I thought it looked about from this edge to just a little bit past this edge. So I made a scale of that. I cut out a rectangle. I traced the shape onto a piece of paper. I cut that out on foam. And then I used my Dremel to bevel these edges so it didn't look too out of place. And then I just did that for both sides, glued it on. For the latch piece, or whatever you want to call this, I looked at the scale for how large this should be compared to the rest of the part, just kind of eyeballing it. And I think I made this like 1 centimeter by 3 centimeters. Let me check. Let's see, that's 1.5 centimeters by 1, 2, 3, 4 centimeters. 1.5. So I have this height scale to 480 millimeters, I believe. Don't trust that. But I just found a scale that worked for me. I thought it was about the same length of that, you know, just a little bit like from the bottom of the plate to about the top of the bottom of this edge. So I just got about that length, and then it was a little bit smaller than this, so I just shrunk it down a little bit. Found a good metric measuring point that I could replicate, and I just cut out 4 rectangles that size. And then once I had those rectangles, I just took my Dremel and I Dremeled down to give this a slanted ramp look to it. And then I also took my Dremel straight down and I flattened this back side so that I would get that lip that the game has. And for the latches that go onto a plate, I did the same thing on the bottom, where, let me make sure that's in focus, right here, where I Dremeled out some of the bottom side of that ramp so that there was enough room for the plate. and I just marked the height with a Sharpie. I put it up against the plate, marked the height with a Sharpie, and then dremeled that out. I didn't do it on these top ones. Once that was done, I just cut out a bunch of small rectangles, dremeled some edges on there, and just glued those on. For all of these rivets, I just took a copper tube that I had sharpened with my Dremel. I pounded it in with a hammer, or I just screwed cut, and I just cut out a bunch of really thin foam. I think I used 2mm. I just cut out a bunch of circles that way with the copper tube, and then I took my soldering iron and I just dipped it into each of these small rivets and then glued it on. Well, glued it on and then hit it with the soldering iron. And I believe it needs like somewhere between 20 and 30 of those rivets on this piece. Another part that has to get free-handed is this circle divot right here. I just take my Dremel and I just Dremel that down into it. This is the same strategy we used for the hand plate. But that's not too complicated. And then while I had the Dremel out, I also went around and I beveled all the edges that, after looking at the game reference images, I thought were supposed to be beveled. I'll let you look at the game reference images yourself and determine what you think should be beveled, but some of the highlights that I beveled were I smoothed this over because I thought this wasn't, I just felt like this was supposed to be a rounded edge. I smoothed this bit over a little bit all around. I cleaned up the inside of here, which is just part of cutting bevel edges. You should be dremeling everything that you, in general, but not necessarily smoothing. I Dremel smoothed these edges right here, and some of this. Yeah, just look it over. Compare the model to the game reference images and Dremel's rounded edges where you think they look good. Alrighty guys, that wraps it up from me today. That's all I have for you. I hope you enjoyed this video. I've put a lot more work into this one than my previous ones, trying to step up my cinematography level. Let me know if you think I achieved that in the comments down below. I just wanted to take the end of this video to shoot a shout out to my friend Angus. He is following along with this tutorial series, and he completed this awesome set of Halo Reach gloves following the previous tutorial in this series. I would love to see what you guys are making too. If any of you guys make this armor or this gauntlet, I would love to see it. Go ahead and tag me on Instagram at RNDMRanger, and I'll try to feature your builds in each following episode of this series. I really do want to see them. That's the whole reason I'm doing these tutorials, to help people like you make awesome costumes. I also wanted to leave another shout out to my friends at the Wardrobe Armory, who just made me a new logo for the channel. I think it looks absolutely amazing. This isn't a sponsorship at all. They're just amazing people over there. But if you'd like to check out their content too, I'll leave a link to some of their pages down below. That's all from me today. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.